Hi, I'm Dan Robinson with the Great Lakes Spirituality Project, and I'm very happy to be talking today with Nancy Walter. Welcome, Nancy. Glad you're here today.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah. Nancy is a lifelong resident of Northwest Indiana in the Lake Michigan watershed. After a 30-year career in the federal courts, she retired to complete her formation program to be a consecrated deaconess in the Lutheran Church, which took place in 2012. After her consecration, she provided pastoral services to her local congregation before retiring from that role. She continues to serve her congregation in a volunteer role, and her efforts have been focused these days on anti-racism work, voting rights and voter education, and environmental justice. And connected to that work of environmental justice for the last couple of years, she's been involved with Just Transition NWI, and the NWI stands for Northwest Indiana. So we'll talk about that group and its work later in our conversation. But to start with, Nancy, you told me that you are a lifelong resident of Northwest Indiana. So what's been your connection to Lake Michigan? How is that a part of your life growing up and as an adult?
Oh, ever since I was a small child, my mom is from Whiting, which is a lakefront town right there on the lake itself. So from a very young age, visiting there and going to the beach there, Lake Michigan has always just been there. And then later when I lived up in Chicago, of course, the lake was very important. Um, and even as working down there, the lake has just been ever present. You know, with its beauty, the parks and the natural areas along it, all of them had just been really important to me.
Sure. Now that's Indiana Dunes. I've been there a few times. It's a beautiful area, and it's so interesting to me that it is this beautiful recreational area surrounded by this huge industry, the steel mills that are up there. Um, and so the area is very
Right.
is a very interesting mix of nature and heavy industry. How does that mix work for you? I mean, how does it affect how you look at the lake?
Well, my family, or my mother's family, emigrated from Eastern Europe for the jobs that were
Ah, okay.
provided by the industry along the lake. I mean, Whiting is basically at that time it was Standard Oil Company town. So all of my uncles on that side of the family worked there or at one of the mills. My father was employed by the railroads, and of course, with Chicago being a railroad hub and a shipping hub because of the closeness of the lake. Um, so that side of it has certainly been important in supporting me. But yet, the natural side of it, you talked about the dunes being surrounded by the mills, which they are. And I'm grateful to Senator Paul Douglas of Illinois and Save the Dunes uh, group that worked tirelessly to get the Indiana Dunes National Lakeshore and now National Park to be preserved because otherwise it could have very well been developed.
Sure.
So to have that gem, which such a diverse ecosystem, you know, right in the middle of all the industry is it's really important that we've preserved something of what the lakeshore looked before the industries came.
Sure. Do you find that there has been a lot of support in the area for preserving those natural areas in the midst of all that industry?
Yeah, I believe so. I believe so. There are many ecological groups that are focused. Save the Dunes is one that comes to mind, but there are many groups there that are working to preserve that area and make sure not only that, of course, now that it's been designated, encroaching on the land won't be an issue, but to hold the industries accountable so that they don't pollute the lake, which of course will also affect the land that the lake uh, abuts against, which would be not only the dunes but the surrounding communities that take their dirt and use the lake for recreation as well.
Sure. Now, as someone whose faith is an important part of who they are and the work that you do, um, does your spirituality sort of influence how you view the lake and the watershed there and your relationship to that?
Oh, very much so. I lean toward Celtic spirituality, and Celtic spirituality sees everything as interconnected. Um, Other spiritualities see, the humans up on top and everything else underneath. So, in other words, humans have dominion, have control over everything, the animals, the flora, the fauna. But Celtic spirituality sees everything as interconnected. So rather than being a top down, it's a web, so that we are connected to all that is. So we are not apart from nature. We are a part of nature.
Mhm. So how do you give, we've been talking about this mix of industry and nature in this particular area around Lake Michigan. So when you talk
Mhm.
about things being connected to each other, how does that connection, how do you, and especially because in your own family, the industry was such an important piece of your growing up and your family's survival, um, how do you see industry and nature connected from that Celtic spirituality perspective? Do you see those relate in relationship to each other?
Yes, I think so, and I think the problem has been is that nature has always been like, industry was up here and nature was a kind of a second tier. We were concerned about it, but we were more concerned with the economy and the jobs that come from them. And if nature got hurt, well, that was just the price of doing business. But I think there's been a shift in that now it's much more important to preserve the natural areas and to hold industry accountable when they do damage to them.
Hmm.
So um, there's a partnership, I think, but there's also a strong accountability component there, where we hold the industries accountable to be a good partner, to be a part of that web.
So it sounds like sort of inherent in this view of connectedness is that there's a certain equality of value with sort of
Yes,
the natural state of things, the ecosystems that are there, but also the industry and the business and the economics of the situation. Is that right?
very much so. Yes, very much so. One is not more important than the other. They are to work together as
Okay,
part of the network that I've been talking about.
sure. Now you mentioned,
It's not,
sorry, go ahead. What?
I was just going to say, it's not an either or, that you can either have industry or a natural environment. It's a both and, that you can have both of them together.
Well, let's talk a little bit about more of that about that because I think if I understand things correctly, that's a little bit of what the Just Transition NWI is about. Is how do we preserve the ecosystems and a just transition from a fossil-based fuel economy to a sustainable future, a sustainable energy economy, but do that in a just way. So, can you talk a little bit about what Just Transition NWI is about and what you've been doing with it?
Sure. Our immediate goal is for a clean closure of the Michigan City generating plant, which is right on the lake shore. There's coal ash, which is what's left over when coal is burned, as it is to make power, and it's very toxic, contains a lot of heavy metals. And what they do with it to store it is they put it in pits. One of those pits is right on the lake and is being held back by a wall which is leaking. So
Mm.
there is coal ash seeping in right now. And in addition to that, there are other pits that we want a clean closure. We want all of that removed and taken away. And the stuff can be reused in industry. So again, there's a benefit. So now we get the clean environment, and they get more materials to be used in industry. So what we want them to do is what's called a clean closure, where rather than just capping the ponds and leaving the material in place, they remove it entirely.
Sure.
And then as the plant is closed down in the next several years, we want to make sure, number one, that the workers are able to get equal employment in terms of pay and benefits, and also that the land is not gobbled up by another industry or by developers, that it remains with the people, to be the people of Michigan City, the people of that neighborhood, to be used for their benefit.
Hmm. So it sounds like in a broader context, the work of Just Transition NWI is around not just cleaning up this immediate situation with the coal piles, but trying to create a more environmental justice, if you will, for the communities that are there in that area. Um,
That's correct.
Now, those communities are there's significant communities of color in that region,
Yes. Yes.
and so do you see? There's a lot of talk around environmental justice and environmental injustice affecting frontline communities, communities of color disproportionately. Has that been the experience that you've seen there in Michigan City and the region?
Most definitely, most definitely. The neighborhoods, the towns that are being most affected by those industries, they were, the towns built by the immigrants. But as the immigrants moved out, when there was the wave of African Americans and Hispanics coming for employment, they took over in those neighborhoods. So now there's a big gap between the north part along the lake shore and further south, to where as people got better jobs, et cetera, they didn't want to live in those communities near the plants anymore, so they moved south and created a lot of the suburbs that are out here.
Well, that's something
So
I've
now you
noticed. Yeah.
Yeah. So now you have people of color, low income people who are quote unquote stuck in these communities, and you have those who don't really care about that.
Hmm.
So and you see examples of that all across the country, where the poorest people and the most low income people are clustered around those industries, because the housing is cheaper there, and it's where they can't afford to live. And there are those who are perfectly okay with that. They think that's just fine. Well, we look at that and say that that's injustice.
Hmm.
That's environmental racism and environmental classism.
That's something I've noticed in driving through that area is the disparity just in housing. I mean, some of the houses are beautiful that are along Lake Michigan. I mean, they're just
Mm-hmm.
spectacular. But you drive in a
Mm-hmm.
little ways from the lakeshore in some of those communities, and you really see a difference in the housing. So,
Most definitely.
so has there been? Do you feel like there's been progress in this effort that the just transition the NWI has been working on? Do you see progress happening?
Yeah, yes, we've certainly had wins. The Michigan City Council has been very supportive in passing resolutions calling for a clean closure. And so, yeah, from the local government, we've had a lot of support. We're getting more support from the community, from the church groups, groups of pastors in Michigan City. So the support is starting to build. Yes.
Okay, okay. And you talked about accountability with the industry in a more general sense, but with the work that Just Transition NWI has been doing, do you see that accountability starting to happen?
Hmm. That's hmm. That's kind of a tough nut to crack, because NIPSCO, Northern Indiana Public Service, they have a lot of money and a lot of power,
Mm,
and so getting them to do anything is it's a tough call, but we are persisting. We have I'm sorry, what's the word I'm looking for? A petition. We have a petition that we've passed around calling for these things I've been talking about the clean closure, that's garnering thousands of signatures. And we are working on involving the community more, because I think that's important, to help the community become their own advocates, to help them become intimately involved in this process. So it's not something that's being done to them or something that's being done for them. It's something that they take ownership of, and they're getting out there and raising their voices and becoming the driving force behind our efforts, to where we're assisting them, but the community takes ownership. And it takes time to develop that.
Sure,
You know,
sure.
especially in communities that have basically been ignored. So they have a learning curve,
Sure.
and we have a learning curve in developing relationships with them.
Yeah.
That work is ongoing.
So you use that phrase learning curve a couple different times. What do you feel like has been learned?
I think what's been learned is we've learned how important people's stories are.
Mm,
Because we can have all the stats and the reports in the world, but when you have people who are right there living, and they talk about, the coal ash dust all around their house that they're constantly having to clean up. They talk about asthma. They talk about just the feeling that their neighborhood has been ignored, and that these big powerful people are going to do exactly what they want to do, and there's nothing they can do about it. Just that feeling, and their passion, and that's what you want to harness, because they want to become advocates, they want to work, but they just don't know quite how to go about it. So I think what Just Transition does is to help educate them and give them the tools.
sure.
So again, there's that curve. We learn more about their stories and what's the best way to develop relationships with them, so we can do the work together, and they learn how to advocate. Now they learn how to use their voice. Now
Now
they learn that they are important.
sure. So you talked earlier about the connection between your spirituality and your relationship with Lake Michigan, with the watershed, with the ecosystems there. Now I want to bring in a third
Mhm.
piece that we've been talking about, and this is this sense of justice, of environmental justice. Do you see spirituality, your spirituality, having a connection to the work of Just Transition NWI specifically, and or to environmental justice in general?
Oh, most definitely. Um, I've seen folks who are, would call themselves Christian, and they are. I have no doubt that they are, but their attitude is kind of, well, we were given this planet and we were given dominion over it, and so we can do whatever we want with it. And that to me is a poor reading of what's intended there. It says in Genesis that we were given the garden to till it, to care for it. It's not, to me, it's never been about doing whatever you want. It's about taking care of this wonderful gift that we've been given. I mean, when you consider, even in spring, as you see things start to bloom, and or else the beauty of the lake in all the seasons. That to me is just such a tremendous gift, not only for us, but I'm thinking, I have two great nephews. One is 16 and the other one's about to turn 8. And I think, well, what about them? No, they deserve to be able to use this gift as well, to have it, and not have us destroy it to the point where their lives are so desperately affected by what happens with the results of with climate change, the result of not paying attention to caring for the environment, but just using it as, whatever's good for the industry is good for everyone, and that's not true, not by any means.
I'm going to switch gears here a little bit because I want to ask you a question I'm curious about. So I grew up in a little farming community about 45 minutes south of Lake Michigan, and as close as we were to the lake, I had no awareness of the lake growing up. My only time I ever really thought about the lake was when we were driving to Chicago to go see a Cubs game, and about once a summer, and we drive by Lake Michigan and say, "Oh, there's Lake Michigan. Oh, that's interesting." So,
yeah.
Maybe this is a question you can't answer because you've always been there, but I'm just curious. Do you think Indiana thinks of itself as a Great Lakes state? Is that something that is in the consciousness of the state?
Probably not once you get, like a couple 100 miles from it. As you were being raised where you were, I don't think there's as strong a consciousness, but yet anything that happens in Lake Michigan will filter down and affect everyone. Anything that happens to any of the Great Lakes is going to, whether you live right on top of the lake, on the shoreline, or if you live a couple 100 miles away.
Sure.
I mean, it's I can't remember the exact stat, but it's one of the largest supplies of fresh water in the world.
Yeah.
So,
I gotta believe you're right. I mean, that's, as I said, it was kind of my experience of growing up there, even that as close as I was to Lake Michigan, that, it wasn't a part of my consciousness. So I gotta believe because we've been talking a lot about just transition and environmental justice, and which is affected by policy, by laws and legislation. I got to believe it's a little bit of an uphill battle in terms of getting the Indiana as a community, as a state, as a legislature to maybe pay attention to some of those issues up there. Do you find that to be the case?
Yes, but interestingly enough, Indiana statewide has the most coal ash pits in the country. So the coal ash issue itself is not a Lake Michigan problem.
Sure.
There are coal ash pits all over the state. So perhaps they don't consider themselves a Great Lakes community, but yet, in their backyard, so to speak, are coal ash pits. So that's going to affect them directly. So as they say, all politics is local. Well, this is a case of, yes, there's something here that's happening to you locally.
Sure.
And so that I think is a way to build support. That no, this isn't just the people up by the lake, making noise. That what they're talking about here is something that affects all of us.
Sure. So I want to do a thought experiment. I'm going to close with a thought experiment for you. I want you to imagine that you're getting up to preach, because I know you've done some of that, to your your Lutheran congregation, and you were given the topic of Lake Michigan and our relationship with God. What would you tell your congregation on a morning like this? I'm kind of springing this on you, so I apologize. I'm just curious. Like 1 or 2 points. Like, it doesn't have to be long, but like 1 or 2 points. What would you say to your congregation?
I'd say that water has been an important part of our story with God and is woven all through it. I'd remind them of their baptismal promises made with water, that water is a symbol that they are claimed by God. I'd say that creation is it's a beautiful gift. It's kind of a loan for us to care for. It's not something for us to use rather than use and steward Yeah, I talk about stewardship as well, because everyone thinks stewardship is money. It's not. There's stewardship of treasures, and water is certainly a treasure. And I talk about how just like God, just kind of assuming God is there, that water is something we just assume it's going to be there. You know, you turn on the tap, you start the washing machine, you know, or you drive by the lake, and there's the lake, and there's people, you know, swimming and enjoying it, see crops being watered. That 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 that's we take that for granted so easily, and not realizing what a part we play in
Mm.
how important it is to steward that gift of water. So that's my elevator sermon.
There you go. Well, that thank you very much. That was wonderful, and that's a great place to end our conversation on, Nancy. So I really want to thank you for the time today. It's been great talking with you.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it as well.
Yeah. You take care.
You too.
Bye bye.